Here are my recollections of the shops and services available in Whalley from 1925 up to 1950. If we start from Calder Bridge and walk towards the traffic lights in the centre, taking the left-hand side of the road first, the first shop we come to is the butcher's shop. Now, this was a purpose-built shop, and it has its own slaughterhouse behind, and across the yard, stabling for a horse and lairaging for cattle, sheep and pigs that were rested in there before they were slaughtered. Around the corner from the shop is Abbey Corn Mill. This mill supplied local farmers with their cattle feeds, and during the 20s and 30s, all day long, a succession of horses and carts from the various farms were calling for their rations for the week or a month. They also delivered by horse lorry in the early days, and then when they acquired motor vehicles at the mill, they could travel a bit further and sort of expand their business that way. And returning into King Street, the next shop was in the little cottage with the Latin inscription on the gable end. That is more or less about number 5. It would be King Street, and that was the shop of Ted Wallbank, who was a boot, shoe and clog repairer. A little further along, where the cottages just bend slightly towards the garage, just round the bend, was the shop of Joe and Fred Woods, the Woods brothers, who supplied greengrocery, fresh fish daily, game and such like. They also had a flat lorry, horse lorry, that they used to haul vegetables around Whalley, Collerstone, Wiswell, and that was there all till after the war. Past the little greengrocery shop, we come to the garage. Louis Croop was in residence there then, and Louis was an engineer, a motor engineer, and actually just after the First World War built his first car, and he had Mr. Gudgeon with him, and together they repaired vehicles locally. There were a few, 1, 2, 3, I think 4 petrol pumps on the front of the garage there. And about 1932, in the shop window was the first £100 motor car. Needless to say, it was a Ford Popular, and Louis offered it for sale at £99, 15 shillings. It was bought by a Miss Merchant who lived across the road and ran it for many years. Next to the garage is now an Indian restaurant. This was Aberdeen Cafe, which was run by Mr. and Mrs. Roger Hargraves and family, and Roger Hargraves himself was an expert in the poultry world. He was known throughout the length and breadth of the kingdom, and he travelled many miles all over the place, even to London, judging poultry, and he kept some very fancy prize poultry in the back of the cafe, in the land that was always known as Mill Fields, and he was quite successful little shop and his poultry business as well. Next door again was the toffee shop, sweets, ice cream and cigarettes. And this shop, when I first remember it, was run by Billy Day, who was the grandfather of William Fenton, whose son now runs the Spar shop. And I remember that changing hands quite a few times. But in winter time, when we were teenagers, we used to go in there and buy hot Vimto and drink it in the little room on the right hand side of the shop. And also in summer we would be in there eating ice cream in the ice cream parlour. Moving along now towards what is now the art shop. That, in those days, early 20s and 30s, and until after the war, was the gents' hairdressing shop, and hairdressing and shaving, with its red and white striped pole outside. And when I first remember it, it was run by little Jack Waring and his son Alan, who employed a lather boy, Tom Charnley. And on a shelf in the shop were all the shaving mugs belonging to the different clients, along with their own brushes. And it was a custom to have your own shaving pot and shaving brush. And as you went in for a shave, of course, he got the shaving bowl down and used your bowl only exclusively for you. But on what I call this side nearest the bridge, there was a little cottage there, which is now, and it's no more than a one or two up and two down, very narrow little place. And a chap set himself up there as a clock dresser, and he sold clocks and watches and repaired clocks. But I can't remember him lasting very long, and he was followed by Mrs. Merchant, who was Lily Fowler then, and she opened the shop as a millinery shop, and she sold hats and gloves and scarves, ladies' hats and gloves, of course. And then on her marriage, she closed the shop, and it reverted back to a cottage. Well, next to the entrance to the barber shop, the shop window, and then another doorway, and the doorway there was the entrance to the Temperance Hotel. And that was just ticking over as I remember it, and it didn't seem to be making an awful lot of money as I was a boy, but it was ticking over. And then after they closed down, it became the library. Previous to that, the library had been housed in an old building opposite to Linefield Avenue. That building is now converted to a very nice little cottage, and they brought the library down there and into King Street to be more central. And then at the end of that block was the chemist shop. It was a chemist then. Now at present it's the post office, but it was a chemist, and Mr. Dawson. It was the only chemist in the village in the 20s and just into the 30s. And before Mr. Dawson acquired the shop, it had been one Mr. Cam. He was the chemist, and he was also the postmaster. And on Mr. Cam's death, the post office then was transferred into Park Villas. So it was just a chemist, and it remained so into the 70s, I think, before it again reverted back to being a post office. Behind the post office in Back King Street was the foundry, Dean's Foundry, and they made castings for gas boilers, the tops of the gas boilers and the feet. They also made the cast iron work for gas ovens, such as the burners and frames and things like that. next door to them, still in Back King Street, was Groom's Garage, and that was a limited company, Groom's Limited. During both wars, the First World War, it had been a little munition factory employing 20 or 30. After the First World War, it reverted to motor engineering as it had been previously. Mr. Groom being a motor engineer, and like Louis Crook, he too built his own motor cars, and I've heard him say that either of them could have been Lord Nuffield, who of course was Morris Motors, and Lord Austin, who was Austin Motors. But of course they were there, and then in 1939, when the war started, the garage again reverted back to munitions, and we used to make hubs for chieftain tanks and plugs for tracer shells and things like that there. It ran 24 hours a day, possibly 40 people employed there, day and night, and it ran 7 days a week. Again, after the war, it reverted back to motor engineering, and there were probably 4 men and then a foreman and 2 or 3 apprentices. And it was open from, between the wars and after the war, it used to be open from 8 o'clock in the morning till 10 at night, and even all night long if there was a vehicle wanted urgently. Now again back into King Street, across the opening from the post office, the first shop of course is the chip shop, and it was a chip shop then, except in the old days it had a little dining room behind the shop, probably about 4 or 5 tables, perhaps seat just over a dozen people, but you could go in there and get like meal, chips and fish, bread and tea, bread and butter, and it'd probably cost you about, well, a shilling 5p or 1 and 6, which is 7.5 pence. And they were very busy, did a big trade. Lunchtime and the evening, after the pubs had closed, it was the first place the young people used to make too, out of the pub and into the chippy. Next door to the chippy was Miss Anne Wilding, who was a ladies' hairdresser, and that today is the solicitor and estate agent, I think, aren't they, or agents for some building society. Moving a little further along, the double fronted shop, which is now the fancy goods shop, that was a double fronted shop with and it was Johnny Webb's. Johnny Webb was a boot, shoe and clog repairer, and also supplied new footwear, ladies, gents and children. And I remember well the sign above the door, which was a big wooden sign protruding out into the street with his name on, and it was cut in the shape of a lady's shoe. The shop was divided in two by a lobby, and on the left hand side, in the room on the left, 2 men were busy repairing footwear, and on the right Mr. Webb had his stock of new shoes. The shop next door to Mr. Webb was the first co-op shop, the first shop that the co-op acquired in Whalley, and later it became an antique shop under Mr. and Mrs. Austin. But the first antique shop was the original one next to the grocery shop, and this was occupied then by Mr. Jesse Ireland, and he sold the antiques and also repaired furniture. Next door again was a little shop that catered for baby wear mostly, ladies' underwear, but mostly baby wear. But before that, it was been the shop of Miss Annie Roos, and Miss Roos was a ladies' outfitter selling dresses and coats and hats. Afterwards, as I say, it became a baby linen shop under Eileen Walmsley, and then Maureen Cookson eventually acquired it. And as we all know now, she occupies the old co-op building. Next again to that, which is now the buttery, was Walter Fenton's grocery shop, and it's next door again to that is the toffee shop. It was a toffee shop in the mid-20s, run by Mrs. Dobson, and the end shop in that block was, which is now the shoe shop, was Groom's. Mr. and Mrs. Groom and their daughter lived there, and the shop was used for car accessories, the sale of car accessories, and it was also the office for the taxi business that Groom's ran, and it was also the office for the whole building, the garage, and there were a couple of petrol pumps in the side street opposite the Dog Inn. Goes into the 70s, I forget now. But that more or less brings us up to the centre, and I think now we can go back to the beginning, back to the bridge, and start on the right hand side. And the first house in Whalley on the right is Bridge Cottage, and this was occupied by Mr. and Mrs. Foreman, and Mrs. Foreman made teas, and she catered mainly for the cyclist touring club, and at weekends a couple of dozen bicycles would be parked all the way around the building, and there were a few tables on the lawn at the back, and it was very pleasant having a few sandwiches and sitting on the riverbank to enjoy them. In Lord John Street, which is the old name for Calder Vale, in the middle of the two rows there was the village reading room, and membership was open to all. Besides all the daily papers, you could play billiards and table tennis and other indoor games. This disappeared at the end of the war. Moving further along in King Street, we come to what is now the Toby Jug. That was the farmhouse of King Street Farm, Mr. and Mrs. Yates and their two daughters. On the left of the front door was the toffee shop, with a separate entrance, and they sold sweets and cigarettes and made some of the best ice cream in Lancashire, and they had a good trade in ice cream, and they also sold milk, and the daughters delivered milk in hand kits around the village. At the end of this block, Mrs. Dodding made light meals, tea and scones, and between this business and the farmhouse shop were two rooms there. Above was a hayloft, and below Joe and Fred Woods across the road used the lower rooms as their store for potatoes and vegetables. Crossing the end of Princess Street, the first shop was Mr. Price, Johnny Price, and he was a gents outfitter. He sold everything from stockings to overcoats. He was a dapper little man, His gimmick was small price, small in stature, small in price, and he was never seen without his spats. He wore spats. Next door to him was an excellent ironmonger's shop, managed for William Langshaw's and Sons by Mr. Rees, and that was a well-stocked shop. Next door to the ironmongery was, as it is now, the chip shop, and that had, like the other one, a dining room behind it, but it also had a dining room upstairs, and they could probably seat about 30 people. And like the other shop, it was always busy. They were open every day except Sunday, and they were open mostly till midnight daily, and they were extremely busy all the time, both shops. Following the chip shop were two private houses, one of which is now the travel agency, but the other one was occupied by Mr. and Mrs. Fell, who offered in their front room ladies' hairdressing. Next door was the purpose-built shop, the grocery shop, owned by Mr. Cunliffe, and later followed by his assistant Alan Whip. Now it's the chemist shop. And then there was the entrance then to the Whalley Arms car park, which is now covered by the new doctor's surgery. And the car park was always full during summer. Just past the entrance to the car park stood two old cottages, and at the end of those cottages, with its gable to the main street, was the old Whalley house, another rather larger cottage. And then there was a recess back towards the frontage of the Whalley Arms, and between the old Whalley house and the Whalley Arms were two cottages. Now all these, of course, have been demolished, and today they would have been renovated, and it spoilt Whalley when they were knocked down. But the old Whalley house was a very successful cafe under Mrs. Scott, and next door in one of the other old cottages was Sally Pickens, and that was another successful little cafe, and they did a good service during the war, serving the troops that were stationed at Barrow and Morton Hall, Mitten Hall, and all the wounded soldiers that were at Calderstones, and the nursing staff there enjoyed light meals at a very low cost during the war. The Whalley Arms, another very busy pub, was equipped for serving meals and catering for functions, weddings, funerals, and any other sort of function that they required. At the back of the Whalley Arms there was a long wooden hut which served light refreshments, tea and coffee and soft drinks, and this catered for the massive amount of coach traffic that came through on its way to Blackpool. And during the summer months, from April to the end of the illumination season at Blackpool, that car park in the morning used to be full with anything up to 20 coaches, and the people were catered for in the wood hut and the various little cafes around, and even the toffee shops benefit. In the evening, on their way back to Yorkshire, the coaches called again, and the chip shops did a roaring trade from the coach passengers. And so that was the lower part of King Street. Now, I think we can now look at Accrington Road. Now, the first shop in Accrington Road was right in the corner by the Swan, which was a butcher shop. And again, like the other butcher shop, at the rear, this had its own slaughterhouse and lairage in for cattle and sheep, and that was a busy little shop. The one next door, which is now the flower shop, the florist shop, had a checkered career. I first remember it as a cafe, and then a chap by the name of Harry Hargraves, he took it and was quite successful for a while, selling the new media radios. After that, it became a green grocery shop, and it was quite successful at that. With the Parker family, who also ran the nurseries behind the Whalley Arms, which is now the site of the new Vale House. And the nursery was very busy during the seasons. The little bungalow now behind the wall, opposite the wall at the entrance to the Whalley Arms parking ground, well, that originally was the office of Richard Whalley and Sons, who were builders, and they had a large yard there which extended well back from the main road, a builder's yard, and they were famous throughout the country as bridge builders. They built the Calder Bridge and the bridge on their way to Reed, and bridges. They travelled all over the country building bridges. In the yard, the corner of the yard back nearest the police station, and just through the gate, was a wooden hut, about 12 feet by 8 feet, and that was put up by William and George Sutton. And from there they sold gramophones and records, and they were quite successful. Eventually they moved the business from there into the front room of Billy's house, which was at number 1 in Park Villas, and carried on from there. After that, the hut was acquired by Austin Quinn, who was a boot shoe repairer, and he was there till he retired, and then the present shoemaker in the village was there until he moved into the shop which he now occupies. The police station housed the sergeant in charge, and he had a complement of at least 5 policemen, and they were available 24 hours a day. It was always manned. In the police station yard at the back, there's a stone building, and twice a year the weights and measures inspector attended there for the whole day, usually always on a Wednesday, which was half day, and the local shopkeepers were required to take their weights, and every shop used weights. There were no automatic scales, or not many, and shopkeepers had to take their weights in there at least once a year, and they were checked by the inspector. The lead infill was taken out and put another piece put back in, and they were stamped with the date and crown stamp to say that they had been passed. They also checked farmers' measures for measuring milk, and stamped those. Behind the police station yard was the stone building, which was the business of the blacksmith, Bob Altham, and he was a craftsman and more an iron worker than a shoesmith, and he made the gates for the entrance to the Abbey in King Street, and he did a lot of beautiful ironwork. Beyond that there was nothing except green grass, and then across the entrance, the rear entrance to the police station, and South View, as it was then known, which is now Accrington Road, was the first shop in Accrington, in South View, and that was the bread baking shop as it is today, the confectioners. And they must have been baking bread there for 100 years or more now. It's certainly a purpose-built building for the purpose of baking, and it's still going on, and I hope it carries on for many years. A little further along, which is now the ladies' hairdressing, was Mr. and Mrs. Chapman and their two daughters. And Mrs. Chapman and her two daughters ran a very, very successful ladies, gents' underwear, children's underwear, household linen, and the shop was packed with stock and brown paper parcels and all sorts of things, and they ask for something and they get a brown paper parcel out and unwrap it, and there were all the things, underwear and shirts and anything at all that you require for a family. They also sold buttons and bows and threads and elastics and knitting wools, and it was a fascinating shop. It just couldn't hold any more stock. At the other end of South View was the old toll house, which is a cottage now that just protrudes out of it into the road, and this was a shop, mixed groceries and toffees and cigarettes. Across the road, Teddy Hart, after the First World War, built the garage and the two semis, and his sons Arthur and Harry lived in these two houses and ran the garage at the bottom of Accrington Road. Next door to that, of course, is the assembly rooms, and that was catering for weddings and dancing, and it was generally used as an assembly hall for different purposes. And behind that, of course, was the Conservative Club, that it still is. Across the entrance to Queen Street and opposite the police station is the Union Club, which is the home of the local Freemasons, and the steward there, Mr. Kenyon, occupied the cottage next door, and this also was a shop selling a few groceries and the usual sweets and cigarettes. And at the bottom of Queen Street, on the right hand side, in her parlour, Miss Dolly Ingham offered ladies' hairdressing. Now, coming back towards the traffic lights, at the back of Queen Street, between the rear of Queen Street and the Whalley Arms car park, a big shed there was occupied by George Holding, and the building next door to him was another blacksmith. This one, Joe Towers, he was a shoeing smith, and there's a succession of horses moving in and out of there daily and all day long. Originally, the old smithy had been opposite the NatWest Bank, but after Rural Motor Services acquired the site, he had to move there, next door to George Holding, and the two ran together. because George was a wheelwright and made farm carts and lorries, and gates, wheelbarrows and everything that was required on a farm. And Joe Towers made the ironwork for the vehicles and the hinges and pins for the gates. George Oldham was a great character and a wonderful wit. He was small in stature with a walrus moustache and always a clay pipe, and his gnarled hands were used to be clasped round the pipe, and it looked like it was going to burn his nose off at any minute, but it never did. And he loved a pint, and if you went there and you'd find choked on a board telephoning. George wouldn't be in, but if you're busy telephoning, the nearest telephone, I think the only one available, was at the Whalley Arms, and he made frequent trips during the day to telephone. And he used to say that there were no such thing as time, there was only light and dark. He said that one chap had made a clock and everybody had been watching it ever since, and George didn't work that way. He always said that he'd only one suit, he could only wear one suit at once, he didn't see the point of having two. And he used to go to first mass on a Sunday morning with his blue serge suits spattered with red lead paint. And characters like them have disappeared. So that was Accrington Road between the wars, as I remember it. The Dog Inn relied mainly on beer sales for its upkeep, and was always busy. Between the Dog and the De Lacy, and the De Lacy had an excellent reputation for catering, for functions and weddings and whatnot, and also for afternoon, high teas during the summer months, catering for visitors. And between the two pubs were two shops. The one nearest the Dog had a double front, one window full of toffee and and the other one was full of toys. There were cheap German toys and crayons and colouring books, magic painting books, and I always remember the other window that used to be full of, not full, but a row of sugar pigs at Christmas. And inside the shop it had a flagged floor, and it was dark and cool, but it was open. I think it was one of the only shops that was open on a Sunday, and it was run by Lakeland and Donnelly, the two sisters, Mrs. Lakeland and Miss Donnelly, and Willem, Mr. Lakeland. He was another comedian, very seriously talked to you, and it took you quite a while to realise that you were having your leg pulled. He's a great humorist. Next door to their shop was Mrs. Brennan. Mrs. Brennan sold groceries and bread. She was followed by Mr. and Mrs. Kelly, and Mr. Kelly was well known in the village for over 20 years. He was the local gas engineer who worked for the gas suppliers, the Accrington and District Gas and Water Board. Across the road was the Swan. That was a accommodation there for bed and breakfast, and it was a very orderly house run by John and Mrs. Shaw and their daughter Pauline, and it was said if you laughed out loud in the Swan, John Shaw would throw you out. It was so orderly. In the yard behind, in the pub yard behind, in the season, the spring and early summer, a massive champion Shire horse stallion attended about once a month to sire and serve local mayors, horses, and that was another business that not many people knew about, but it was there, and that was discontinued as horses became less used. The shop that is Marshall's now, that also was a green grocery, but mainly grocery, and it was occupied by Mr. and Mrs. Start at that time, but previously Mrs. Dean and her daughter had run the shop, and they moved into the little cottage next door, and which is now a estate agent. And then, of course, the end shop was the news agents, which was then run by Bob Langshaw, who had retired from William Langshaw's and Sons, and old Bob used to sit there all day. His counter was an upturned tea box, and the old gentleman of the village used to call in for a chat in a newspaper. Church Lane. Well, the first house in Church Lane was Billy Pollard's shop. Painter, decorator, and also incorporated Pollard and Whalley electricians. A little further along, opposite the church gate, was the antique shop of Mr. Parker. And then the next shop in Church Lane was the one in the square with its gable nearest the school, and that was a confectioner's shop, bread and confectioneries. A very high class trade and excellent bakers. In the school on a Friday evening, the Westminster Penny Bank was open, and it was run by Mr. Tennant. I remember Mr. Tennant and somebody to assist him, and they were open, I think, from 6 till 9 or so on a Friday evening to receive small savers deposits, and that went on until I think Martin's opened a sub-branch in Whalley. Beyond the arches at Cross House, Uncle Tom's cabin, and that was a little shop which was situated behind the Cross House, the home of Algernon Ben Parker. And Ben was another great character. He was a retired builder and stonemason, and a reformed ale can, and a great musician with Billington Brass Band. He was also a bit of a braggart. He used to brag, he used to say Clitherborough. They didn't call it Clitherborough till they borrowed me to play for them. And his little shop was in a little building behind the cottage. It was really a kiosk. He served you through a lift-up window, and it was very popular with hikers, and the children walking to Whalley School from Billington used to call in there, and they loved his homemade sarsaparilla. And he was another great character in the village, as I've said before. And when he died, instead of flowers on his coffin, they carried him to church with his trombone on the top. Returning now to King Street, the first shops after Pollard's were converted buildings. Between Pollard's and the bank used to be two old English cottages with little gardens in front of them, and they were acquired by Dick Whalley, the builder, and he converted them into shops. And the first one was occupied by one of his daughters, who sold ladies' wear, dresses and gowns and coats. The next shop was the other one was a bakers and confectioners, run by Arthur Edmonton and his wife, and he had 2 or 3 of his staff. And then, of course, the most imposing building next to them was the bank. Well, I think I mentioned earlier the penny bank at the school, and I said Westminster Penny. It wasn't the Westminster Penny Bank, it was the Yorkshire Penny Bank.
There is one other business I should have mentioned in Back Queen Street, and that is the business of Bulcock Brothers. And Bulcock's
immediately opposite the bank was the bus station, and it was nothing like it is today. They were a small piece of land, say from the newsagent's shop to the, well, almost to the edge of the curve of the roadway on the bus station. There was a small piece of land there owned by Ribble Motor Services, which just about held 2 buses which used to reverse in. In the middle was a wooden building, not very big, with the seats inside, seat about 6 or 8 people, and the rear portion was a very small office for the use of the bus inspector. Next to the bus station was a high wall enclosing the yard around the old smithy which used to stand there. After the bus company bought the Vale House site, the smithy moved down to Back Queen Street. Beyond the smithy was the gardens of Vale House and Vale House itself. And Vale House was an hotel offering bed and breakfast by the day or week and full board, and that was run by Mrs. Waring and her daughter Sally, whose husband and son ran the barber shop. It continued up to the outbreak of war, and then it became the local YMCA, and it catered for the troops stationed at Barrow and Morton Hall and the wounded soldiers from Calderstone. And it was run by volunteers, the WRVS, and it was a little bit of home comfort for the lads in the services away from home. Eventually, after the war, of course, it survived as a cafe, and but the building was deteriorating, and it was thought its useful life was over, and it was demolished. The high wall that surrounded the Vale House was on the side of Woodlands Drive, and in the early 30s Woodlands Drive had not yet been built, but there was a gateway there into the field. And this gateway, on a weekend, Sundays more than Saturdays, was a petrol station, Grooms didn't have any petrol stations on the main road, so on a Sunday morning a couple of apprentices used to trundle a tank on wheels to this gateway. There's a petrol sign on top, perhaps Esso, and they sold petrol from there. On busy days, travelling backwards and forwards to fill it up 2 or 3 times at the garage behind King Street. But it was suddenly realised that they were travelling about with a petrol bomb in front of them. Not that petrol bombs had been heard of in those days, but with a bit of common sense and opposition, it was discouraged and ceased altogether. The cottage on the corner of King Street and Woodlands Drive was in the front room there, in the parlour, was a telephone exchange, and it was operated during the day by 2 young ladies, but after 5 or half past in the evening and before 8 in the morning, Mr. and Mrs. Copeland manned the switchboard, and if Mrs. Copeland was enjoying a radio programme or maybe out of the house, you could turn the handle on your telephone and wait till she came back. But she was very efficient, and if you needed a doctor or a nurse or somebody like that in a hurry, she could very often tell you where they could be located. Oh, she'd say somebody rang a little while ago, and people were a bit more guarded in the use of the telephone in those days, but nevertheless it was very, very useful. A little further on, the house at the other end of that little block there, the Accrington District Gas and Water Board used to hold office in the porch there quarterly to collect gas bills that were due, and likewise the Electric Power Company, Lancashire Electric Power Company those days, attended at the Methodist school to collect their dues. The Methodist school itself answered all sorts of social purposes for the church, and one of them being was the young men's club that they had there, billiards and table tennis, and this was very popular until the Second World War, when all the lads were called up, and it faded away. I don't think it's been revised since. The White House was the first offices of Lancashire County Council Surveyors Department. They occupied the ground floor there for quite some time. Behind them was Langshaw's, who have been established in Whalley for, well, above 100, nearly 200 years, I suppose, as joiners, and they were famous for their church carvings, and a tremendous lot of church work was done there. There were no houses in that little cul-de-sac at that time except Rose Cottage, and Langshaw's got their water from a lodge there where the new bungalows are built, and the mill, the workshop was driven by a water wheel. Quite a few men employed there, and apprentices, I should think half a dozen men and 2 or 3 apprentices. And then we come up there to the Croft, which was the home of the doctor, the only doctor in the village at that time, Dr. Postlethwaite, who retired about 1933, and Dr. Harkness came, and Dr. and Mrs. Harkness made ample use, or use of the ample rooms, I should say, in the croft by turning it into a maternity and nursing home. And quite a few, well, middle 50-year-olds around the village were born there. And that was another very useful service. Now, if we turn back now to George Street, which was built purposely to house the new co-op building, which was completed in 1912. Now, if you look at that building, it's a magnificent building, and it was big enough to serve any Lancashire town centre at that time. And the late Roger Green of Green Brothers is reputed to have said at the time it was completed, well, that building will be the end of Whalley Co-op, and after it was. The co-op originally was formed in Painterwood at Billington in a little cottage, and a few weavers got together and formed a society, and they sold grosses which they bought wholesale in the evenings after they finished work, and the job flourished, and they took on one full-time staff, and then their first shop was in Billington on the main road, and that was in what is called now Abbey View, the fourth house, and they used that for a time, and then built the purpose-built shop, which is now a newsagent's, and then they built branches in Lango and Barrow, and acquired a shop in Whalley and King Street, and then they built their emporium. Well, the first room or part of it was the office, the first part, and in the office was the manager, the assistant manager, the office girl, and a junior office girl. The steps by the side of the office led up into the hall, the assembly hall, which was mainly a cinema in its early days, but the seats were movable, and many balls and dances were held there. In the early days there were silent films, and all the seats were wood, and another Joe Woods used to play the piano to accompany the silent films. And the great trick of the lads when everything was quiet was to push hard on the wooden chair and cause a screeching noise when it was a very tense moment, a tear-jerker in the film or something like that. The first talkies there, I remember hearing the first talkie, the place was packed, and it was a silent film accompanied by 12-inch gramophone records. The soundtrack was on a gramophone record. Now, of course, the gramophone was hand-operated, so it wasn't very long before the records were running behind the film, and it was a proper fiasco. They never did get through it as a talkie, but that was the first talkie I ever heard, and then a few years later they got their Westinghouse machine in, and they were Adultio films, talking films, and the place used to be packed most nights. They changed the programme twice a week. On a Saturday there were two houses, and if you didn't book, you didn't get in at the second house. It was always fully subscribed. The special treat at Christmas for the kids, I remember, were on Saturday afternoon, or you used to have silent films, Tom Mix and Charlie Chaplin, and Rin Tin Tin, the dog, and all a conjurer and sing songs. Joe Woods led the singing, and then when we were going home, each child was given a bag of sticky toffee that hadn't either sold very well or been left over, but we all got a bag of toffee, and the manager himself wished everybody a Merry Christmas. The cinema was the prop of the whole business in the later years. Down below, underneath the hall, was the grocery, the drapery, the soft furnishings and hard furnishings, the boot and shoe, the confectionery, and at the far end, the butchery. The first butcher shop, when they took to butchering, was they used a grocery shop, and they opened up in King Street in a butcher's as a butcher's for a year or two, and then they swapped it about. They took the butchery back to the main building and brought the groceries back to the King Street branch. So there would be 2 full-time men and a woman and an errand boy in the grocery. There would be certainly 2 women all the time in the drapery, and they covered on ladies' shoes and sold furniture. What little furniture they stocked was supplemented by a catalogue, and the coal wagon was dispatched the day after if you wanted a bedroom suite or any other kind of furniture. The coal wagon was dispatched to Manchester to the Co-op wholesale warehouses, and they were returned with it the same day. Boots, shoes and clogs were repaired at the rear of the building. You entered it by the second entrance and went down the side of the staircase, and at the back there was Jimmy Hull and his assistant and another apprentice, shoe repairing. The butchery employed 2 full-time men and an apprentice, and the bakery had 1 full-timer in the shop, 2 men who baked bread overnight, the bakery manager and another man baking bread and cakes during the day, 2 women, I think, a couple of women finishing cakes, and a cleaner who cleaned tins as they used them. So they employed quite a few people in that building. Apart from that, they used to have a couple of staff at Barrow, 2 at Billington, an apprentice, and an apprentice at Langholm. And then there was the coal business that they ran, that employed 2 men. And there was 1 man, sort of an odd job man and warehouse man. There was an extensive warehouse at the back of the building. Far away at the other side of the car park was a large garage that housed the vehicles. There was a coal wagon and a grocery delivery wagon. There was a van that hawked bread and confectionery around the area, and all in all, there were quite a lot of people employed by the co-op. But as I've just mentioned before, after the Second World War, it began, I think before that it had begun to decline, and it was top heavy. It was not attached to any other part of the co-op movement in the country. It was just a small little company, more or less on its own. It ran its own bank, taking deposits from small savers. And what happened, the manager, who was a very, very proud man and a much respected citizen, he was one time chairman of parish council, chairman of Clitheroe Rural District Council, chairman of Calderstone's Hospital Management Board, a good churchman, a good man, but a very proud man, and he treated the co-op more or less, almost dared to call it his own business. And it was revealed in the end that what had been going on for many, many years, the funds from the deposit had been transferred into the business account to subsidise the failure, till eventually there was nothing left. And there were thousands of pounds lost by the poor people around about. They lost their life savings. But the real loser was the manager himself. He lost his life. And it all came about through television. Overnight, the main prop of the business, which was the cinema, it disappeared. Television killed the cinema, as it killed lots of other cinemas. And the co-op movement in Whalley failed. And one of the biggest losers was the manager's brother himself, who filed for bankruptcy. And at a moment's notice, at Monday lunchtime, the whole shooting match was shut down. I think the year was 1963. But it wasn't the first co-op to fail. It might have been the first in this area. It certainly was. But many, many other bigger concerns have faded away, and the co-op movement's hardly noticed today. But that was Whalley, Billington and Whalley Co-op. Along George Street, at the far side of the car park, was a signal box red garage, and this garage housed the post van. The bungalow at the end of George Street was built by Mr. Brooks, who was the postmaster when the post office was in Park Villas, and he built it to retire into. Apart from that, there were no other buildings in George Street in the 20s and early 30s. There was nothing in front of the co-op building except allotments. Late in the 30s, there were a pair of semis built opposite to the co-op office. Now, returning to King Street, I should say, the buildings from the end of George Street up to the grammar school were always known as Park Villas, never as King Street. And number one was occupied by Billy Sutton, who I mentioned earlier was in the gramophone business, and they transferred it from the hut by the police station to the house. Well, as television killed the cinema, radio killed the gramophone business, and Billy quite farsightedly turned his front room into a toffee shop. Now, that was off from the word go, because it was opposite the cinema. Wanted something to chew for the cinema, so they were into Billy's shop for the cigarettes and toffee, and he got a very good ice cream recipe, which became known throughout Lancashire. I think people used to call from all over the place for it. But in a small way, he started to sell ice cream, and then he acquired two very big, well, they were 1000cc BSA motorbikes with a big sidecar, a box on the side as big as a minivan. And during the summer months, two young fellows in the evenings travelled all around the district, as far out as Sabden, selling ice cream from these motorbikes, and that was quite an enterprise. But it ceased when the war started. and Billy didn't choose to restart it. He was sufficiently established after the war to do without it, although he had to supplement his business during the war by delivering post. He was a postman. Next door to Billy's shop was a private house, but here Dr. Laurie, whose home and practice was in Sabden, Dr. Laurie held a surgery in the parlour, and his patients used to queue in the lobby of the house to see him, and sometimes outside, and I've seen people almost down to the garden gate, and they used to say if you went to see Dr. Laurie with a bad cold, you run the risk of getting pneumonia before you got to see him, because you were stood out in the elements. Next door again, in the late 20s, that was just a dwelling, but a chap turned the front room into a butcher's shop, a chap called Masson, and who'd worked for John Whalley, the other butcher, and he tried to, not very successfully, a few months, and well, he disappeared in Jack Masson, and left his wife struggling, but she eventually sold out, and the people who bought it was Mr. Brooks, the post office next door. The post office was run by Mr. Brooks and his three daughters, Gwen, Millicent and Marion. I think Marion was getting married no, it was later than that. Marion and her husband took the shop next door and turned it into a greengrocer's shop, and Marion's husband, Mr. Williams, he had a motor vehicle and he hawked greengrocery around the area of Whalley, Billington, Wiswell, and that shop was quite successful. Followed by Gordon Entwistle. Meanwhile, the rest of the Brooks family were running the post office, and also they sold quite good crockery and china. Their complement of the post office, I think, would be about 4 or 5 postmen, a post van, and a hand cart used for fetching mail from the station. The van was used to deliver mail around Hurst Green. Sabden, which was included in the area, was done on a bicycle, as was Whalley Nab. I don't like that word, Whalley Nab. The Nab's never been in Whalley, it's in Billington. I should say Billington Moor. And the mail was twice a day, and a much better service than we get today. There were no other shops in Park Villas then, except the bank, which was Martin's Bank, and they opened a sub-branch daily in the front room of the first house in the second block. The 3 shops that you see now at the top of the street, that was a very peculiar shaped piece of land, more or less triangular, and the building is triangular, the widest part being the chemist's shop, which is now the lampshade shop. Next to that shop were garages. There were 3 garages. The end shop was just a little triangular room that Langshaws used to display their church furnishings. The building was built by Langshaws. I think it was one of the first attempts at building that Langshaws did. And it was about, I think, around about 1930 or so when it was completed, and the late Arthur Preston had just finished his education at college, and he was a fully blown chemist, and he opened up there as a chemist in that shop, and we then had two chemist shops in Whalley. Next door, as I said, were garages used by Pollard and Wallace to house their ladders and tools, and the next two were garages. I know Dr. Postlethwaite used one, and then there was a little shop at the end which was just for display. During the war, the three garages were the fire station, the National Fire Service, which were volunteers, part-time, and their dormitory was the little end shop, and there was about 8 men on duty every night throughout the war. The grammar school was used by the Church of England, as a young men's institute. Boys from the age of 13 up to, well, after they were married, if their wives allowed it, but they were mostly young men. And that the hall there housed a billiard table and table tennis and other indoor games, and they also ran a football team, as did the Methodists. And behind, in the schoolroom behind, say from about, I suppose, 1935, Miss Cam, who had been Miss Taylor's governess, Miss Taylor Greathwaite, set up, with the help of Miss Taylor, a primary school for children of primary school age, and they were there from, say, 35 to well after the war, when Miss Cam got too old and the buildings alike were not suitable. But I should think she taught about 24 at the most, probably. But they used to look very nice when they were about the village on school trips in their grey and red blouses and red blazers, boys and girls. Beyond the grammar school, as I mentioned much earlier, was the old building which housed the library, and this was also the estate office of the Worsley Taylor Estates. It was the land agent's office. There was nothing then, only green fields from there to the station, but immediately besides the old building was the Albion Tennis Club, and there were 2 tennis courts which were in full use throughout the summer months. Passing along then, there was we come to the station, and the station was very busy. The station master lived in the house which was built on the railway bank facing the cricket field, and there was the office. The booking office was manned all day by 1 or 2 men, and there were 3 or 4 porters. The goods yard employed 2 men full time, and a lot of goods came in that way for Calderstones and Stoniers College. The Stoniers College had their own wagon which was running backwards and forwards all day carrying coal, but at holiday times, when the boys from the college came to Whalley Station, they arrived at Whalley Station to the hospital and a little bogie train which they used to fill up with steam from the hospital boilers. Get enough steam into the boilers to run it down to the station and back again. But the main traffic for the passenger traffic was Manchester. In the morning you'd see the businessmen in Whalley with their rolled umbrellas and bowler hats walking along to catch the stock exchange train, which was about 8:30, and that was daily. It was also a sight to see the twice daily chariot race to the station. Farmers, milk floats carrying the morning and evening's milking, long gallop to the station to catch the milk train, which was about 9 o'clock in the morning and 6 in the evening. I also remember the evening excursions to Blackpool, and the price was 2 and 6pence, 12.5p, plus another 5p if you wished, which took you into the Tower or the Winter Gardens, and those excursions were very popular with the young folks. Used to return from Blackpool at midnight, and we used to go on, you could visit a show or dance or whatever you wished in Blackpool. So that was the station, and I think about 1936 the cafe across the road from the station was built. It was known then as Calder Cafe, which is today the Abbott's Court, and it was built for the passenger traffic at the station, but it was too late. Buses are already taken over, but it functioned well enough, and until it became the restaurant it is today. Beyond the station, the first house on the right, which was High Lawn, and Mr. Wilkinson there ran a coal business from there, and he had about 4 light multi-wagons, 2-tonner 50 hundredweight wagons, used on light haulage and carriage into the village. Across the road again at Oriel House, a great long sign hanging on the front of the building said taxi, which was quite visible from the station as it was meant to be. And then a little further along, again on the right hand side, the last stone terrace there before you get to the bypass, and Mr. Clint had his little grocery and mix shop. And further along again, past Abbey Farm, it was a little 2-stone cottages, one of which Mrs. Franklin ran her little grocery shop, and again her daughter Cicely had a bicycle which she wheeled and rode around with heavy loads of groceries to be delivered. About 1932 the co-op built their Mitten Road branch, and that was under the ownership of the co-op till the bankruptcy, and since then it's been a bit intermittent in its life, but it's still there, and it's open again at present. Returning to Clitheroe Road, in the first house on the terrace from the left, the first resident dentist in the village set himself up, a Mr. Morgan. Before that, Mr. Dello lived in the terrace row opposite would always oblige in the evenings after he came home from his practice in Darwin. The first bungalow it was on the left was built approximately about 1930, and late in the 30s a young woman turned that into a nursing convalescent home with 1 or 3 or 4 beds, but that was short-lived. And that, I think, covers nearly all the businesses in Whalley, except further along Clitheroe Road, just the other side of the bypass, is the road down to Shaw House, and Shaw House was owned by the Cooperative Wholesale Society, and there was a big slaughterhouse, and the business had its own railway sidings, and cattle by the trainload used to come from Liverpool, Irish cattle and Scotch cattle and sheep, and they must have killed some 200 cattle and 400 or 500 sheep a week there, plus the pigs which they reared themselves at their piggery at Whitgill in Mitten, because though in those days the Cooperative Wholesale owned all the land from Whalley on the right hand side of the road right away through to Bashall Heath. There were a few, there must have been 2,000 or 3,000 acres, but and that was a very good business, and it was there till about, I think, 1970, supplying all the cooperative shops in all the towns in East Lancashire. So there we have it, businesses in Whalley up to 1950. There were several farmers delivering milk daily, twice a day in summer. Jack Stavely, Arthur Proctor, Woods Brothers from Wiswell, and Bill Holgate, Mrs. Pye from Millington, and they were delivered not in bottles in those days, but from the hand measure, ladled out from the big kit carried in the float. And so now we come to the punchline. Who in those days used all these shops and services? When you think that Linefield Avenue wasn't built till about 1930. The Sands was built up in about 1935. Woodlands Drive was built by Langshaws in, I think, 1937. Woodfield View, just before the war. 1936, I think it would be, Abbey Road. And Abbey Road, in my opinion, was some of the best property built in Whalley during that time. Arthur Proctor, the late Arthur Proctor, built them, and he was newly retired, and he stood over the job as his own clerk of works, and he saw to it that only the best went into those houses. The rest, like Green Park and Abbeyfields and other, well, the whole of Moorfield, were post-war constructions. So you've got to look at Whalley as it was in 1925, and the only brick houses were those in Park Villas and the Bank. Anything else was stone. So it's truly amazing. But when I was a member of the Borough Council, I used to tell them that I'd seen more tourists in Whalley in a day than you would see in the whole of Ribble Valley today. And it was certainly the tourists that kept the cafes and pubs going. It was nothing to see 6 or 7 buses, one after the other, climbing out to Whalley on a weekend, Sunday evening, having brought loads of people in during the day. And they were well catered for. And I think today that the development at Vale House is a bit of a mistake, because they should be catering for car parking and toilets there, because there's no doubt the Whalley did benefit a lot from tourism even 60 years ago, and it seems strange to me that in these days of denationalisation that the councils should be providing a massive car park for one or two private bus companies. The rail company sold the site because they no longer needed it. They said a lay-by for 2 buses was sufficient, and I would think that's all that's needed today, and not a great park just for the sole use of a bus. 3 or 4 passengers into Whalley at any one time. And those are my views on Whalley over the years. It's as accurate as memory will permit. That I haven't consulted any books or maps or references at all. I'm just speaking from memory, and the dates I've given, although they may not be too accurate, they'll not be above 1 or 2 years out. Jack Carr, 1989. I do hope I haven't bored you, but the comparison between today and yesterday is, at that time there were at least 4 shops baking their own bread. There were at least 5 grocery shops in the main street. There were 4 shops boot and shoe repairing. So as far as the public are concerned, they have the choice that they had in those days, and I suppose it comes about through the giant supermarkets today, and the motor car, of course, contributed a great deal to people shopping out of the village.